Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Killing Floor 2 for PC, Xbox One, and PlayStation 4. What you're seeing here is the PC version. This is a first-person shooter and the sequel to Killing Floor. It was developed by Tripwire Interactive and released in its full version in 2016 for PC and PS4, but it was first released as an early access title in 2015 for PC. More recently, it was also released on the Xbox One, specifically in August of this year as I'm recording this video. Now, the reception of the game has changed a bit over time, depending on whether you're talking about the early access release or, of course, the full release, but I'm going to be taking a look at the full release here as it stands now in October of 2017. And as far as my general experience with the game before this goes, I actually did look at an early access build of this back in September of 2015. But it's undergone quite a few changes since then, quite a few bug fixes and rebalancing tweaks and that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and start delving into this thing and finding out what exactly we're dealing with now. Well, as far as presentation goes, this is definitely a rather large step up over the previous game. If you're not familiar with the original Killing Floor, it was actually an Unreal Tournament 2004 mod that eventually got turned into a standalone game on the same engine. Needless to say, it is looking extremely dated these days, but Killing Floor 2, on the other hand, runs on Unreal Engine 3 and looks considerably better. They have packed a rather large amount of detail into the environments, into the weapon modeling and animations, to the point where they even have, if I remember correctly, 200 frame per second animations for the weapon cycling and reload animations, and that is so that when it goes into slow-mo during the Z time, it actually ends up looking extremely good. And that is certainly the case. The weapon modeling and animations are pretty fantastic in this game across the board, and even just the modeling in general is extremely well done. But that said, there is one thing that absolutely steals the show as far as the visuals are concerned, and that is the gore. The last time we had a game with gore this ridiculously detailed, it was Soldier of Fortune 2, and it is used to extremely good effect here. Whenever you do significant enough damage to an enemy, it actually blows chunks out of their character model. So for example, if you're shooting an enemy in the face, it's actually blowing chunks of their head off, until eventually you just blow the head off entirely. At which point you will be bearing witness to one of the game's more amusing features of its physics engine, and that is simulation of fluids. Now, obviously in this particular instance we're talking about blood, but in the game it ends up looking more like red slime. But whenever you blast an enemy's limb off, it's going to start spewing blood from that particular orifice, and if you have the physics feature enabled, because it is an NVIDIA specific feature and it is actually very taxing on your hardware if you don't have good hardware, then you're going to see that fluid splattering all over walls and floors and really you name it, and once it hits that floor or wall, it actually starts to spread out and move as you would pretty much expect a fluid to do. The thing is, it is completely exaggerated in this game to have absolutely ridiculous amounts of it. You see, when the developers went about making this game, they set out to make something completely over the top and absurd. It is not meant to be taken remotely seriously. And the gore system really does go a long way to making that apparent, because not only are you blowing chunks off of enemies, but whenever you see an enemy just completely explode, you're actually seeing like intestines and livers and such flying all over the place. It's ridiculous. And speaking of ridiculous, whenever you go into an area and it gets invaded by Zeds and you clear it out, whenever you look back at that area after you're done, everything is now red because it completely covers the walls and floors and ceilings, etc. And it is actually persistent until the very end of the match. Once the match is over, you load a new map and obviously it's pristine. But whenever you clear out an area, the game makes sure you knew you cleared out that area. And when you bring all of that together, you end up with combat that is very visually satisfying. You really do feel like your weapons have a lot of impact behind them, and it really does go a long way to making you feel like your weapons actually are doing some real damage to these enemies. But then there's the other aspects of the visuals, like the character models and the textures. The textures are okay, but they're really nothing to write home about, and even for 2015, this was really not the best looking game from a texture standpoint. And as for the character models, they're decently detailed, but then they have this odd shader effect on them to where the characters kind of look like they're made of plastic. It's a bit of a shame that they put so much effort into making the environments really pop and the gore effects so ridiculously viscerally satisfying, but then when you get into other elements, it's just kinda at best. But then you go over into sound design, and that's where things get rather uniform compared to the visuals, because visuals have some pretty big ups and downs. Sound design, on the other hand, is extremely consistent across the board. Weapon and explosion sounds are generally rather solid, although some are a lot better than others. But here's the thing. Across the board, every single one of the gun sounds is punchy. It's not quite as beefy as I would really like, because it doesn't have quite the bass kick to it that it really deserves, but generally speaking, when you fire a powerful weapon, it sounds powerful.
Dented their numbers, but there are plenty left.
But of course, as you can see, not only are the weapon sounds nice and punchy, but so are the gore sounds, and it really does make the entire weapon feel very solid as a result. The rest of the sound design is also very consistent in its quality, but the music may be something that doesn't really fit your taste. Most of the soundtrack is death metal, and I'm really not a fan of death metal. But the thing is, it's mostly because I really can't stand that style of vocals, and most of the music in this actually is completely devoid of lyrics. Now, if you want to, you can turn on lyrics, but I just leave it turned off, and what you end up with is some instrumental death metal that works decently for what it's trying to do, which is create a sort of high-octane, yeah, you're just mowing down hordes upon hordes of Zeds kind of feeling. So even though I don't personally care for it, it works for the game, and if you like that sort of thing, then you'll definitely like it in here as well. But then there's the voice acting, which is ridiculously cheesy, and it's supposed to be. As I said before, this game is not meant to be taken seriously at all, and that does extend to the characters as well. Each one does have its own voice acting, and a lot of them are downright silly. I mean, hell, the game features 2 guest characters from other games, one of which is Chivalry Medieval Warfare, where you have a knight who is definitely sounding as cheesy as he possibly can, and you have a German soldier from Red Orchestra 2. And as for the characters who are original to Killing Floor, well, they're suitably silly as well. I mean, they're constantly spouting one-liners, they're constantly making goofy comments and insulting each other. It's just a mess of nonsense, really. But all the voice acting is actually surprisingly well done and flows pretty well, all things considered. It's just that you can tell they were just kind of goofing around and having fun with it, and that's precisely what the game's setting out to do to begin with, so it ends up working. Just don't expect any award-winning performances from this thing or anything like that, and you'll be fine. So when you bring everything together, you end up with a presentation that is generally very consistent in its high quality, except for a few bits here and there, which are really more minor annoyances than anything else. But of course, as solid as the presentation is, what really matter here are the story, or rather complete lack thereof, and the gameplay. The only real story you get in this game is what's on the store page. Basically, a biotech company had an horrifically failed experiment in the previous Killing Floor game, and now you're dealing with a post-apocalyptic scenario that ravages the entirety of Europe. And it's your job to go into those infested regions and wipe out every single Zed you come across. No, really, that's the entire game right there. It's a single-player and co-op game where you go in and you wipe out every single Zed that you come across in wave-based format. Every single map you play on is going to have the exact same objective, which is survive all of the waves of Zeds that come in, and then you'll have a boss fight at the very end, and if you win that boss fight, then you win that particular match. There are several different types of Zeds you'll encounter, everything from the most basic Zeds possible, which are the cysts and the clots, which are ridiculously easy to take out, but then eventually you'll start running into Zeds that are more powerful when you get into the later waves, and you'll end up running into enemies like the Scrake or the Flesh Pound, which are ridiculously tough enemies that take a lot of concerted effort to bring down. And then of course the boss fight requires quite a lot of concerted effort because they have multiple stages of health, and you have to gradually whittle them down over time. Now along the way you're going to be earning in-game currency called Dosh that you can then spend on getting upgrades at the trading pod whenever the wave ends. And when I say upgrades, I really mean new weapons as well as ammunition for the weapons you currently have, and of course armor and grenades. Now you can't just purchase whatever you want, you have a weight limit that you have to adhere to, and each different weapon has its own specific weight value that you need to keep in mind when you're purchasing new equipment. And there are a pretty good variety of weapons on offer here. You've got everything from your basic pistols on up to assault rifles and machine guns, shotguns, and more inventive stuff like a weapon that simultaneously is a buzzsaw and a buzzsaw blade launcher. Now, which weapons and other equipment that you're able to purchase is going to depend on 3 factors. First, and most obvious, the amount of dosh that you earned from the previous wave. You can also save up your dosh for later waves if that's something you prefer doing as well. That way you can actually get access to the higher tier upgrades. The other 2 factors are your personal preference of playstyle, and, more importantly, which perk you're using. Perks are the classes of Killing Floor. Now, they had 7 of them in the previous game, and they have 10 of them in this one. They've introduced 3 new perks, the Survivalist, the Gunslinger, and the SWAT, which all have their own sets of weapons that they're good with, and their own sets of abilities that you unlock over time. You earn experience points by just slaughtering Zeds, as well as completing specific objectives depending on your class. So one might, for example, have you take out a specific type of Zed for more experience points. Once you've gained enough experience points, you will level that perk up, and eventually you will start unlocking new abilities, which allow you to select 1 of 2 abilities per slot in order to improve your character. These are generally passive bonuses like significant increases to damage output or damage resistance or things like that, and then of course there's other things as well like the tactical reload, which is effectively a reload speed increase, but instead of just increasing the reload speed, it actually changes a lot of the animations. Now, leveling your perks in the previous Killing Floor game was an absolute slog. It took absolutely forever to level them up, and the benefits for leveling up were really pretty insignificant. Here you have tangible incentives to level up your perks in the form of the various abilities that you unlock, as well as the ability to kind of customize that particular perk to your own personal playstyle, and on top of all of that, it's a lot quicker to level up in this than it was in the previous Killing Floor. To give you an idea, I leveled the Field Medic perk from level 1 to level 7 in the span of 1 game. Now, of course, your mileage may vary on that. In that particular instance, I was playing with a full party of people. We were all playing on the hardest difficulty setting, and I was getting quite a few good shots in, as well as healing up my team constantly. So I was pretty much just an experience point generating machine that particular game, but that doesn't happen every single time. Still, you are unlocking new abilities at a pretty reasonable rate and leveling up your perks at a pretty reasonable rate, but you still have the annoyance factor of having to level up each perk individually, because it doesn't transfer across all of them, just whichever one you're playing in that particular match. This ultimately means that it can feel kind of tedious when you're grinding a specific perk up to get to a specific ability that would really help you out in the long run. But here's the thing. I've already covered everything there is to cover as far as the gameplay mechanics go. You select a perk, you go into the match, and you mow down hordes upon hordes of Zeds either by yourself or with a team, and you end up eventually getting new weapons to use to mow down more Zeds, and eventually you have a boss fight, you win or lose the match, and that's it. There is only the Horde mode, the fighting off waves upon waves of Zeds as they come in, whether it's single player or co-op. There is no single player campaign, and there is no versus multiplayer. So you have to go into this game knowing exactly what you're getting yourself into, because if you don't, then you're going to find that it becomes extremely repetitive extremely quickly. And that ultimately means that it falls to that core gameplay loop to really determine whether or not you're going to enjoy this. If you like Horde mode and you're okay with putting up with a lot of repetition, then you'll probably be fine with this. But if you're like me and you don't like Horde modes, you don't like zombie games, and you generally speaking do not like tedium, then this is going to wear on you after a while. The major saving grace it has is just how ridiculously satisfying the weapons are to use. As I said before, everything feels like it has some impact behind it. It's all very nice and punchy, and that's what really carries this game in the long run. Because when you get down to it, it is a very simple game. And ultimately, the entire experience comes down to whether or not you actually are going to be able to get anything out of that simplicity. It's the kind of game where if you hop into a game with a bunch of friends, then you're probably going to be able to enjoy the living hell out of it. And if you like that sort of repetition, then you'll be perfectly fine playing Killing Floor 2. But if that's not your thing, then you're not going to be able to get all that much out of it. You might be able to enjoy it for a few games, but it's not going to have a really lasting impact. And while they have been pretty decent at getting updates out and getting new content in there for special occasions and such like that, the cosmetic items that they have on offer are just downright insulting. And that's because they're all effectively locked behind a paywall. Tripwire, in a move that absolutely baffles me, decided that the best way to put in new cosmetic items would be to lock them behind the CSGO style crate system, where you might get a crate and then never get a key to unlock that crate. Thus meaning you have to go into the marketplace and buy a key for $2.50 a pop in order to open a crate which may or may not have an item you want in it. And really, the only saving grace that has is that it's only cosmetic items. If they started putting gameplay affecting content in there, then that would just be absolutely ridiculous. But at least in this instance, it's only cosmetic items, so I can treat it as something that's really annoying, but not deal-breaking. But all of that said, if you're looking for a horde-style co-op game where you can play with your friends and mow down hordes upon hordes of zombie-like enemies with ridiculous amounts of blood and guts spraying everywhere, then Killing Floor 2 is your game. It's pretty reasonably priced at $30, although it does regularly go on sale for much less than that, so you may want to wait for it to go on sale. But if this is something that looks like it would be up your alley, then you'll probably enjoy it. Otherwise, I'd say wait for a sale, pick it up when it's really cheap, and give it a try, or if it's available on a free weekend, then definitely try it then and see if it's something you actually like. Because it's definitely not a game for everyone, but for the people it is aiming for, it does a rather good job at what it does. Ultimately, I give this a sort of conditional 3.5 out of 5. It does a good job of doing what it sets out to do, but there are quite a few factors about it that are somewhat annoying, and the repetition really does grate on you after a while, unless it is your sort of game. Hence the conditional 3.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.